In the harsh, wind-swept plains of 1878 Dakota Territory, beauty was often measured by delicate hands and unmarked skin. Women with soft features and gentle manners were prized above gold dust in frontier settlements. But for Abigail Summers, whose face bore the scattered marks of childhood smallpox and whose hands were rough from years of practical labor, worth would be measured in ways the women of Blackwood settlement could never comprehend. In the ability to read signs others missed, in the gift of seeing what remained hidden to ordinary eyes, and in the quiet courage that would ultimately save lives when danger came howling across the prairie. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Dakota winter lingered well into April, snow still clinging to the shadows of buildings along Blackwood Settlement's single rutted street. The morning stage arrived with a spray of mud and slush, wheels grinding to a halt before Jensen's general store. The usual crowd gathered, Mr. Jensen himself hoping for supply deliveries. The blacksmith's apprentice, tasked with collecting mail, and a cluster of the settlement's women, eager for any new face or gossip to break the monotony of late winter. But on this particular Tuesday, the crowd was larger, anticipation palpable in the crisp air. Word had spread that Thomas Calloway's mail-order bride was arriving on today's stage, a school teacher from Philadelphia whose letters had apparently charmed the young widower sufficiently to prompt a proposal sight unseen. Poor Thomas. Vivian, Harper whispered to the cluster of women gathered near the boardwalk. Living alone these past 2 years, with only his daughter for company. No wonder he was desperate enough to send away for a bride. Margaret Wells nodded vigorously, her elaborate hat bobbing with the motion. Though I must say, Charlotte would have made him a fine wife if he'd had the sense to court her properly. She glanced meaningfully at her daughter, who stood nearby, pretty features arranged in a deliberately indifferent expression. The stage door swung open, and the driver helped. Down an elderly couple, followed by a traveling salesman, recognizable by his sample case. The gathered crowd strained forward as a final passenger appeared in the doorway. A woman of medium height, wearing a practical traveling suit of navy blue wool, unadorned save for a simple brooch at her collar. As she stepped fully into view, a barely audible collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. The woman's face, though possessing pleasantly regular features, was marked with the distinctive scattered scars of smallpox. Shallow pits across her cheeks and forehead that no amount of careful grooming could disguise. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple knot, and her posture, while straight, lacked the practiced grace of women conscious of being observed. Vivian Harper's hand flew to her mouth, not quite concealing her shocked expression. "Sweet heavens," she murmured. Did Thomas know what he was getting? The newcomer glanced around the gathered crowd, her dark eyes missing nothing despite her seeming uncertainty. Her gaze settled on a tall man pushing forward through the onlookers, his expression shifting from eager anticipation to poorly concealed shock as he took in her appearance. Thomas Calloway recovered quickly, extending his hand as he reached her. "Miss Summers, I'm Thomas Calloway. Welcome to Blackwood Settlement." Mr. Calloway. Abigail's voice was clear and well-modulated, betraying her education despite her modest appearance. She took his offered hand briefly. "Thank you for meeting me." An awkward silence stretched between them as Thomas struggled to reconcile the woman before him with whatever image her letters had created in his mind. Behind him, whispers had already begun circulating among the settlement women. "Let me help with your luggage," Thomas said finally, motioning to where the driver was unloading trunks from the stage's roof. "My house is just at the north end of town. Not far to walk, unless you'd prefer I bring the wagon around." "Walking suits me fine," Abigail replied, her composure intact despite the stares following her every movement. "I've been sitting for days." As Thomas arranged for her larger trunk to be delivered later, Abigail became aware of a small figure partially hidden behind a rain barrel at the corner of the general store. A girl of perhaps 8 or 9 years watched her with undisguised curiosity. Her eyes, the same clear blue as Thomas's, wide in a solemn face, framed by wheat-blonde braids. Abigail offered a small smile to the child, who neither returned the gesture nor looked away, maintaining her solemn assessment. This, then, would be Emma, Thomas's daughter, mentioned frequently in his letters. The child left motherless when influenza had claimed her mother 2 years earlier. The walk through Blackwood Settlement provided Abigail her first proper view of what might become her home. A single main street, lined with false-fronted wooden buildings in various states of weathering, the expected businesses of a frontier settlement: general store, blacksmith, small hotel, land office, and a saloon, whose raucous piano music seemed incongruous in the morning light. Beyond the main street, perhaps 40 dwellings spread outward, some substantial, others little more than shacks, their chimneys sending thin spirals of smoke into the pale sky. Settlements grown considerably this past year, Thomas explained, obviously trying to fill the uncomfortable silence between them. Railroad survey team says the line might come through by next summer. Been good for business at the mill. Abigail nodded, noting how Thomas's gaze rarely settled directly on her face, instead focusing somewhere over her shoulder or on the street ahead. A familiar pattern. People uncomfortable with her appearance, finding ways to avoid looking directly at her scars. They passed a small, white-painted church, where a balding man in a clerical collar was sweeping the steps. He straightened as they approached. "Reverend Parker," Thomas called, clearly relieved for the interruption. "This is Miss Abigail Summers, just arrived from Philadelphia." The Reverend set aside his broom and approached with a genuine smile. "Miss Summers, welcome to our community. We've been eagerly awaiting your arrival." Unlike Thomas, Reverend Parker looked directly at Abigail, his gaze kind and unwavering. "I understand you've been teaching in Philadelphia. Our little school has been without a proper teacher since Miss Winters left to marry last autumn. The children have been making do with rotating lessons from various settlement ladies." "Yes, I taught at the Fairfield School for Girls for 6 years, Abigail replied, warming slightly at the mention of her profession. "Mr. Calloway mentioned in his letters that the settlement needed a teacher." The Reverend nodded approvingly. "Indeed we do. Perhaps once you're settled, you might consider taking on the position. The school board, such as it is, meets at the church Thursday evenings." "I would be interested, yes," Abigail said, acutely aware of Thomas's discomfort beside her. As they continued toward Thomas's house, Emma materialized from somewhere behind them, following at a careful distance, her small boots making little sound in the muddy street. Abigail pretended not to notice, allowing the child her careful observation. Thomas's home proved to be one of the settlement's more substantial dwellings. A 2-story frame house painted white with green shutters set back from the road with a small fenced yard, a porch wrapped around the front, furnished with a bench swing and several chairs, suggesting summer evenings spent outdoors. "It's a lovely home," Abigail offered as Thomas opened the gate. "Sarah, my late wife, designed it," he replied, his expression softening momentarily. "We built it 5 years ago, when Emma was just starting to walk." Inside, the house revealed careful maintenance, but unmistakable signs of a household missing a woman's touch. The furnishings were good quality, and arrangements practical, but curtains hung slightly askew, and the braided rug in the parlor showed worn patches that needed mending. A collection of Emma's dolls occupied one corner of the sitting room, arranged in careful rows as though awaiting instruction. Mrs. Hollister comes in twice weekly to help with the heavier cleaning and laundry, Thomas explained, leading Abigail through to the kitchen at the rear of the house. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. But it's been challenging, managing everything since Sarah passed. The kitchen was large and well-equipped with a substantial wood stove, pine cupboards, and a table by the window that offered a view of the vegetable garden, still dormant under patches of snow. A door led to what appeared to be a pantry and another to a back porch. Your room would be upstairs, next to Emma's, Thomas continued, his formal tone suggesting a tour for a prospective boarder rather than a future wife. I thought you might want to rest after your journey before we discuss arrangements further. The careful phrasing confirmed what Abigail had already determined from Thomas's behavior. He was reconsidering their agreement in light of her appearance. The realization stung, despite its familiarity. Her letters had been honest about her qualifications, her character, her circumstances, but she had not explicitly mentioned the smallpox scars that had, since her 12th year, shaped how the world responded to her. That would be welcome, thank you, she replied with dignity, refusing to acknowledge the implicit withdrawal in his manner. Emma, who had slipped into the house behind them, now stood in the kitchen doorway, still watching Abigail with that solemn, assessing gaze. "Emma," Thomas said, noticing his daughter, "come greet Miss Summers properly." The child approached, her movements deliberate and contained. "Hello, Miss Summers," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Did you bring books with you?" The unexpected question brought the first genuine smile to Abigail's face. "Yes, quite a few. Would you like to see them once they're unpacked?" Emma nodded, her expression still serious, but with a flicker of interest in her eyes. "Papa said you know lots of stories." "I do," Abigail confirmed. "Perhaps I could share some later if you'd like." Another nod from the child, this one accompanied by the slightest relaxation of her guarded posture. Thomas showed Abigail to the upstairs bedroom, a pleasant space with sloped ceilings, papered walls, and a brass bed covered with a patchwork quilt. A pine dresser, washstand, and small writing desk completed the furnishings. The room's single window overlooked the settlement's northern edge, where buildings gave way to the vast Dakota prairie stretching toward distant hills. "I'll have your trunk brought up when it arrives," Thomas said from the doorway, maintaining a careful distance. "Supper's usually at 6, but take your time resting. The journey must have been exhausting." Left alone, Abigail sank onto the edge of the bed, allowing herself a moment of raw honesty. She had traveled over 1,000 miles based on correspondence that had suggested understanding, respect, and the possibility of affection developing over time. Thomas's letters had spoken of needing a mother for Emma, a partner in building a life in this growing settlement, someone who valued education and refinement in a place often lacking both. Her own letters had been equally forthright, describing her teaching experience, her practical skills, her desire for a life beyond the limited opportunities available to her in Philadelphia. They had exchanged photographs, but the small daguerreotype she had sent, carefully posed in profile, had not revealed the extent of her scarring. Now, faced with the reality of her appearance, Thomas was clearly regretting his proposal. The pattern was familiar: initial shock, followed by discomfort poorly disguised as politeness, then eventual withdrawal. She had experienced it with the parents of potential students, with fellow teachers, with the few men who had briefly shown interest before fully seeing her face in unforgiving daylight. Abigail moved to the small mirror hanging above the washstand, studying her reflection with the detachment of long practice. At 32, her features had matured from girlhood into womanhood, with expressive dark eyes, a straight nose, and well-formed lips. Her figure was trim but strong from years of practical work, Had it not been for the scattered pockmarks across her cheeks, forehead and chin, legacy of the illness that had nearly claimed her life as a child, she might have been considered handsome, though never a conventional beauty. But in a world where a woman's appearance often determined her possibilities, those marks had limited her options at every turn. Only in teaching, where her education and natural authority with children outweighed concerns about her appearance, had she found a path forward. As she unpacked her small traveling case, placing carefully folded undergarments in the dresser drawers, Abigail considered her situation with pragmatic clarity. Thomas Calloway would likely find a way to dissolve their arrangement without openly acknowledging his reasons. She had anticipated this possibility, reserving sufficient funds for return, passage if necessary. But before conceding defeat, she would explore what opportunities the settlement might offer, particularly the teaching position Reverend Parker had mentioned. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Opening the door, she found Emma standing. In the hallway, a book clutched to her chest. "Papa said I shouldn't disturb you," the child said, "but I wanted to show you my favorite story." Abigail stepped back, inviting Emma into the room with a gesture. "I'm never too tired for books or for meeting someone who loves them." Emma approached cautiously, extending a well-worn copy of Robinson Crusoe, its binding reinforced with carefully applied fabric tape. "Can you read the part where he finds the footprint? Papa does the voices, but he's been too busy lately." Something in the girl's expression, a careful containment of loneliness, resonated with Abigail's own childhood. Memories. She seated herself on the edge of the bed, patting the space beside her. "I'd be happy to, and I promise to do my very best with the voices." As Emma settled beside her, small body still maintaining a careful distance, Abigail opened the book to the dog-eared page and began reading. By the time she reached the dramatic discovery of the mysterious footprint, Emma had inched closer, her shoulder now lightly touching Abigail's arm as she leaned in to see the simple woodcut illustration. Below, the front door opened and closed, followed by the murmur of voices. Thomas, speaking with a woman whose tone carried clearly up the stairs, despite the inability to distinguish her words. The visitor's voice held the unmistakable notes of curiosity, poorly disguised as concern. "That's Mrs. Harper," Emma said, interrupting the story. "She brings pies sometimes and asks Papa lots of questions about when he might come to dinner." The simple observation revealed volumes about the settlement's social dynamics and Thomas's position within it as an eligible widower. Abigail nodded, acknowledging the information without comment. "She won't like that you're here," Emma continued with a child's blunt assessment. "She wants Papa to marry her friend Charlotte." "I see," Abigail replied, carefully neutral. "Shall we continue with the story?" Emma nodded, but her attention had shifted. She studied Abigail's face with renewed intensity, her gaze tracing the pattern of scars with unabashed curiosity. "Does it hurt? Your face?" The direct question, delivered without malice, deserved an equally direct answer. "Not anymore." "It did. When I was sick, about your age actually, but now they're just marks, like freckles or a birthmark." Emma considered this. "Billy Watson has a big birthmark on his arm, shaped like a bear. Nobody thinks that's bad. This is different for some people," Abigail explained gently. "When people see marks like these on a face, especially a woman's face, it makes them uncomfortable because it's not what they expect to see." "That's silly," Emma declared with absolute conviction. "You can still read good stories. That's more important than how you look." The child's simple logic, uncontaminated by social conventions, brought a genuine smile to Abigail's face. "I think so too, but not everyone agrees with us." Voices rose from downstairs. Thomas, his tone apologetic, but firm, and Mrs. Harper, whose response carried notes of theatrical concern, thinly veiling something less charitable. The front door opened and closed again, more firmly this time. Footsteps sounded on the stairs, and Thomas appeared in the doorway, his expression shifting from lingering annoyance to surprise at finding his daughter comfortably settled beside. "Abigail, Emma, I thought you were helping Mrs. Hollister shell peas for supper," he said, his tone suggesting this was a convenient fiction rather than an actual expectation. "Miss Summers is reading Robinson Crusoe," Emma replied, as though this explained everything. "She does good voices." Thomas's gaze moved between his daughter and Abigail, noting their proximity with evident confusion. Emma rarely warmed to strangers, having withdrawn into watchful silence after her mother's death. "I see," he said finally. "Well, Mrs. Hollister, has supper nearly ready downstairs? Perhaps you could help set the table." As Emma reluctantly slipped from the room with her treasured book, Thomas remained in the doorway, his discomfort evident in his rigid posture. "I apologize for Mrs. Harper's visit. News travels quickly in small settlements." "There's no need to apologize," Abigail replied, rising from the bed and smoothing her skirts. "I'm sure people are naturally curious about newcomers." Thomas shifted his weight, clearly struggling with what to say next. "Miss Summers, Abigail, I feel I should be direct. Our arrangement, made through correspondence, was perhaps hasty on my part, with Emma to consider and the complications of settlement life." Abigail lifted her chin slightly, preserving her dignity as she completed his thought. "You wish to reconsider our engagement." Relief flashed across his features, quickly replaced by shame. "It's not that I find fault with your character or qualifications. Your letters revealed both to be exemplary. It's simply that circumstances. My appearance does not match your expectations," Abigail stated flatly, sparing him the awkward evasion. "You need not elaborate, Mr. Calloway. I've encountered this reaction before." Thomas had the grace to look genuinely contrite. "I apologize for any distress this causes you. Of course, you're welcome to stay until arrangements can be made for your return journey, or—" He hesitated. "Reverend Parker mentioned the teaching position. The settlement genuinely needs someone with your qualifications." The offer, though practical, underscored the rejection. She was acceptable as the settlement's teacher, safely relegated to a role where her appearance would be secondary to her function, but not as a wife to be presented proudly in the community. "I would like to explore that possibility," Abigail replied with quiet dignity. "A small settlement with growing children needs education more than it needs gossip about a mail-order arrangement gone awry." Thomas nodded, visibly relieved by her pragmatic response. "The school board meets tomorrow evening. I'll speak with Reverend Parker about introducing you." As they descended to supper, Abigail's mind worked steadily through her altered circumstances. The teaching position, if secured, would provide immediate purpose and modest income. Housing would need to be arranged, perhaps a room with a respectable family or quarters at the school itself. Her savings would cover immediate needs while she established herself. In the kitchen, Mrs. Hollister, a sturdy woman of middle years with capable hands and a no-nonsense expression, gave Abigail a forthright assessment as introductions were made, then nodded with what appeared to be approval. "About time this settlement got a proper teacher. Those children have been running wild since Miss Winters left." Emma, carefully arranging forks beside each plate, looked up with unexpected animation. "Miss Summers is going to be our teacher. Will you tell stories at school too?" The child's enthusiasm provided momentary balm to the sting of Thomas's rejection. "If I'm offered the position, yes. Stories are an excellent way to learn about the world." As they settled around the kitchen table for a simple but hearty meal of roast chicken, potatoes, and early spring greens, Abigail noted how Emma positioned herself in the chair beside hers rather than next to her father. The child's instinctive acceptance contrasted with her father's discomfort, highlighted the stark difference between adult prejudice and a child's more essential evaluation of worth. Through the kitchen window, Abigail could see the vast Dakota landscape stretching toward the horizon, the setting sun casting long shadows across terrain still patchy with melting snow. Beyond the settlement's edge, the untamed prairie extended in all directions, beautiful, challenging, and indifferent to human concerns. In such a place, practical skills and inner strength surely mattered more than conventional beauty, whatever Thomas Calloway and the settlement ladies might believe. As darkness fell outside and lamplight created a small circle of warmth in the kitchen, Abigail found herself oddly calm despite the day's disappointments. The journey had changed, but perhaps not ended. Tomorrow would bring new possibilities and, with them, the chance to establish herself on her own terms in this frontier community that might, in time, learn to see beyond the marks on her face, to the person beneath. The school building stood at the eastern edge of Blackwood Settlement, a simple clapboard structure with a small bell tower and 2 windows on each side. Inside, a single room contained rows of battered desks facing a teacher's table and blackboard. Reverend Parker walked Abigail through the space the morning after her arrival, pointing out the meager resources with apologetic gestures. "We have books for the younger children, but they're well used, as you can see," he explained, indicating a shelf where tattered McGuffey readers and basic arithmetic primers were carefully arranged. The older students often must share texts or copy lessons by hand. Abigail ran her fingers along the spines of the worn volumes, mentally cataloguing what was available and what would be needed. "I brought several advanced readers and a geography text that might help," she offered, "and I have experience creating materials when resources are limited." The Reverend's expression brightened. "That's precisely the practical approach we need, Miss Summers. Our last teacher, though well-intentioned, was somewhat overwhelmed by the challenges." "How many students attend regularly?" Abigail asked, evaluating the 20-odd desks crowding the room. 32 when everyone comes, ages 6 to 15, Reverend Parker replied, "though attendance drops during planting and harvest seasons when the farm children are needed at home." Abigail nodded, already formulating approaches to manage the varied ages and inevitable absences. The challenges were significant but familiar, not unlike those she had faced at the charity school in Philadelphia's poorer district where she had taught before joining the Fairfield School. "The school board meets this evening," the Reverend continued. 5 members, myself, Thomas as the mill owner, Mrs. Harper representing the town families, Mr. Nordstrom for the farming families, and Dr. Wallace. I've already spoken with most of them about your qualifications. Abigail noted the careful phrasing. "And my appearance?" Reverend Parker met her gaze directly. "I've suggested they consider what matters most for our children's future. Your experience and education are precisely what this settlement needs." "But not everyone agrees," Abigail surmised, reading between the lines. The Reverend sighed. "Mrs. Harper has concerns. She feels a teacher should present a certain image to impressionable young minds." "Unmarked by disease, you mean," Abigail said flatly. "Her views are not shared by all," Reverend Parker insisted. "Dr. Wallace, who understands medicine, recognizes that your scars pose no danger and speak only to a childhood illness long past. Mr. Nordstrom cares only whether his children will learn their figures correctly." As they exited the schoolhouse, Abigail paused on the simple wooden steps, surveying the settlement spread before her. In daylight, Blackwood revealed more details. Women hanging washing behind picket fences, a group of men raising a frame for a new building, children playing with hoops along the rutted street. "I appreciate your support, Reverend," she said quietly, "but I've faced these reactions before. I won't force myself where I'm not wanted." "Give them time," he encouraged. "Frontier communities may start with shallow judgments, but they learn quickly to value substance over appearance when survival depends on it." As they walked back toward the center of town, a commotion near the general store drew their attention. A small crowd had gathered around two approaching riders. One a settlement man Abigail didn't recognize, the other a striking figure whose appearance immediately commanded attention. Tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and long black hair secured with a leather band, the second rider sat his horse with the easy confidence of one accustomed to covering vast distances. His clothing combined elements of European and native dress, buckskin leggings, and a fringed jacket over a cotton shirt. A wide-brimmed hat casting shadows across features too distant to discern clearly. "Ah, James Blackwood has returned," Reverend Parker observed, "and it appears Nathan Wolfe has accompanied him." "Blackwood, as in the settlement's name?" Abigail asked. The Reverend nodded. "James's father founded this place 20 years ago. James himself serves as the primary scout and guide for the area, mapping routes, monitoring native movements, guiding travelers and supply trains when necessary. And his companion? Nathan Wolfe is more complicated to explain," Reverend Parker said carefully. "Half Dakota by birth, raised in both worlds. He serves as interpreter and scout when needed, though he rarely stays in any settlement for long. He's been invaluable during tensions with the remaining Dakota bands, but his presence makes some townspeople uncomfortable." As they drew closer, Abigail could see the two men more clearly. James Blackwood appeared to be in his early 40s, his weathered face partially obscured by a neatly trimmed beard streaked with grey. He was speaking with several men from the settlement, gesturing toward the northwest, with evident concern. Nathan Wolfe stood slightly apart, one hand resting on his horse's neck, his gaze sweeping the gathered crowd with watchful intensity. Even from a distance, Abigail could sense the coiled alertness in his posture, like a man accustomed to assessing potential threats from all directions. When his gaze reached her, she felt an unexpected jolt of recognition. Not that they had met before, but a moment of mutual awareness between two people accustomed to being outsiders. His eyes, startlingly pale against his sun-darkened skin, held hers briefly before moving on, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. "What brings them back to town?" Abigail asked, suddenly conscious of standing exposed in the street, beside the Reverend. "That's what concerns me," Reverend Parker replied, his usually jovial expression sobering. "James doesn't return mid-season without good reason. I should speak with him. The church often serves as meeting place when community matters arise." He escorted Abigail back to Thomas's house, where Emma waited on the front porch, a slate and chalk in her hands. The child brightened visibly. At Abigail's approach, "Papa said you saw the school," she called. "Will you be my teacher now?" "That decision hasn't been made yet," Abigail replied, climbing the porch steps. "But I'd be pleased to help with your lessons in the meantime. What are you working on?" Emma displayed her slate, where wobbly letters formed simple words. "Spelling. Mrs. Harper gave us a list last week, but I'm not sure about some of them." Abigail seated herself on the porch swing beside Emma, accepting the slate and list of spelling words with appropriate seriousness. "Let's review them together, shall we?" For the next hour, she guided Emma through the spelling list, using mnemonic devices and stories to help the child remember difficult combinations. Emma proved a quick study, her initial reserve gradually giving way to animated questions and even occasional laughter as Abigail created increasingly ridiculous sentences using the spelling words. They were so absorbed in their lesson that neither immediately noticed the arrival of visitors until boots sounded on the porch steps. Abigail looked up to find James Blackwood and Nathan Wolfe standing before them, both men removing their hats as Emma scrambled to her feet. "Mr. Blackwood," Emma exclaimed with evident delight. "Did you bring me anything from your travels?" James smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. "Would I forget my favorite young scholar?" He reached into his pocket and produced a smooth stone of unusual coloration, bands of red and gold running through polished black. Found this in a stream bed 3 days' ride from here. Thought it might suit your collection. Emma accepted the stone with reverence, turning it to catch the light. It's beautiful. Look, Miss Summers, it has colors like sunset. James's attention shifted to Abigail, curiosity evident in his direct gaze. You must be Thomas's intended. News travels, even on the prairie. Abigail Summers, she confirmed, rising from the swing and extending her hand without attempting to hide her face, though the intended part appears to have been reconsidered. If her scars surprised him, James gave no indication, taking her offered hand briefly. James Blackwood, and this is Nathan Wolfe. Nathan nodded acknowledgement but didn't extend his hand, maintaining a careful distance that suggested habitual caution rather than rudeness. Is Thomas at home? James asked Emma, who shook her head. He went to the mill early, said there was a problem with the saw blade. James exchanged a glance with Nathan. We need to speak with him and some of the other town leaders. There's been concerning movement from renegade bands up north. Trouble? Abigail asked, instinctively drawing Emma closer. Nothing immediate, James assured her, though his eyes remained serious. But best discussed with the settlement council. Dr. Wallace said they're meeting tonight about the school position. Perhaps we could address both matters then. Emma looked up at Abigail, alarm crossing her small features. Does that mean fighting like before? James crouched to Emma's level, his expression gentle. No, little one, just information everyone should have. Your father and the others will make sure everyone stays safe. Nathan Wolfe, who had remained silent during this exchange, suddenly spoke, his voice deeper and more accented than Abigail had expected. The child asks good questions, direct, important. His pale eyes rested on Emma with surprising gentleness. Good trait. Keep that. Emma studied him with open curiosity. Are you really half Indian, like Billy Watson says? He says you can track anything across Bear Rock and talk to wolves at night. A hint of amusement flickered across Nathan's austere features. I am Dakota on my mother's side. I track, yes. Wolves. He shrugged. They keep their own counsel. James straightened, ruffling Emma's hair affectionately. We should find your father, explain what we've seen. Miss Summers, a pleasure to meet you. I'm sure we'll speak further. At tonight's meeting. As the men departed, Abigail noticed how James moved with the easy confidence of someone at home in his surroundings, while Nathan maintained watchful awareness, his gaze continuously scanning their environment, even during casual conversation. Mr. Wolfe is strange, Emma observed once they were alone again, but not scary strange, just different strange. People who live between different worlds often seem that way, Abigail replied thoughtfully. They see things others miss because they understand more than one way of looking at the world. Emma considered this, then changed subjects with a child's fluid attention. Mrs. Harper says your face would frighten the younger children. I told her that was stupid because Billy Watson's arm doesn't frighten anyone. Then she made me stand in the corner during our last lesson. Abigail stifled a surprised laugh at the child's blunt report. While I appreciate your defense, perhaps we should find more diplomatic ways to express differences of opinion. What's diplomatic? Emma asked, sounding out the unfamiliar word. Finding ways to disagree without making the other person feel attacked, Abigail explained. It's an important skill for getting along with others, even when you think they're wrong. Emma frowned thoughtfully. But Mrs. Harper was wrong, and mean. Yes, Abigail acknowledged, but pointing that out directly rarely changes someone's mind. Usually it just makes them defensive and more determined to prove themselves right. This concept clearly required further consideration. Emma returned to her spelling, while Abigail sat contemplating the upcoming meeting that would determine her immediate future in Blackwood Settlement. The arrival of James and Nathan with concerning news complicated matters. Communities facing potential threats typically closed ranks rather than embracing outsiders. Later that afternoon, Thomas returned home earlier than usual, his expression troubled as he greeted Abigail and Emma in the kitchen, where they were preparing a simple supper. "I understand you met James Blackwood today," he said, washing trail dust from his hands at the pump. "Did he explain why he's returned?" "Only that there's been concerning movement from renegade bands," Abigail replied, noting the tension in Thomas's shoulders. "He said he would address the settlement council tonight." Thomas nodded, drying his hands on a nearby towel. "The meeting has been expanded to include all household heads. Sarah Nordstrom will watch the children at her farm for those attending." "Including me?" Abigail asked, uncertain of her status. "Of course," Thomas replied, seeming surprised by the question. "Your teaching position will still be discussed, and, as a potential settlement resident, you should hear James's report firsthand." The unexpected inclusion, acknowledging her as having legitimate place in community discussions despite her ambiguous position, caught Abigail off guard. "Thank you. I appreciate being included." Thomas's expression softened slightly. "Whatever. Our personal arrangements, your education and experience deserve respect. The settlement needs to consider your application based on merit, not—" He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable completing the thought. "Not my appearance," Abigail finished for him, her tone matter-of-fact rather than accusing. "Yes," Thomas acknowledged, his gaze finally meeting hers directly. "I've spoken with Dr. Wallace about that. He's been quite firm in educating those with some misconceptions." Emma, who had been setting the table nearby, interjected with characteristic directness. "Mrs. Harper is the one with misconceptions. She and told Charlotte that having Miss Summers as teacher would give the children nightmares." "Emma!" Thomas exclaimed, clearly mortified. "That's not appropriate to repeat." "But it's true," Emma insisted. "I heard her saying it to Charlotte outside the store yesterday." Abigail placed a steadying hand on Emma's shoulder. "Remember our discussion about diplomatic responses? This might be a situation where that applies." Emma sighed dramatically, but nodded. "I still think she's wrong." The church was filled to capacity that evening, with nearly every adult from the settlement crowded onto the simple wooden benches. Oil lamps cast a warm glow over the gathering, their light catching on the anxious expressions of parents concerned. About both education and security, Abigail sat near the back, conscious of the sidelong glances and whispered comments that followed her entrance. Vivian Harper, seated prominently near the front with her daughter Charlotte beside her, made a point of turning to stare directly at Abigail before leaning to whisper something that made several nearby women glance back with poorly concealed curiosity. Reverend Parker called the meeting to order with a brief prayer, then addressed the immediate concerns. "Friends, we have two important matters to discuss tonight. First, James Blackwood has information about conditions to the north that affect our security. Second, we need to consider Miss Abigail Summers for the position of settlement teacher." James Blackwood stepped forward, his trail-worn appearance contrasting with the more settled townspeople. Nathan Wolfe remained standing at the very back of the church, positioned where he could observe the entire gathering while remaining slightly separate from it. 3 days ago, while returning from Fort Thompson, Nathan and I encountered signs of a band moving south along the river, James began without preamble. "Based on tracks and campsite evidence, we believe it's Red Hawk's group, approximately 15 warriors with women and children." A murmur ran through the gathered settlers at this news. Red Hawk's name clearly carried significance beyond Abigail's understanding for those new to our community, James continued, glancing briefly toward Abigail and several other recent arrivals. Red Hawk refused to remain on the reservation after the 76 agreements. His band has occasionally raided isolated homesteads, primarily for horses and supplies, though they've avoided confrontation with larger settlements. "Why are they moving south now?" Thomas asked from his position with the council members. The agency reported most bands were accepting rations after the harsh winter. Nathan Wolfe spoke from the back of the room, his deep voice carrying clearly. "Agency rations short again. Red Hawk's people hungry. 2 children died last month from sickness. They moved south for better hunting, away from soldiers. And closer to our outlying farms," Mrs. Harper interjected, fear sharpening her tone. "We all remember what happened to the Pedersen family 3 years ago." James held up a hand to quiet the anxious murmuring that followed. "The situation is concerning but not cause for panic. Nathan has connections with Red Hawk's band through his mother's relations. He believes they're primarily seeking hunting grounds, not conflict. And we're supposed to trust his assessment," Mrs. Harper demanded, casting a suspicious glance toward Nathan. "His loyalties have always been questionable." The accusation hung in the air, its ugliness magnified by the sacred setting. Nathan's expression remained impassive, though Abigail noticed how his posture tensed slightly, fingers curling at his sides before deliberately relaxing again. James stepped forward, his voice hardening. "Nathan has saved lives in this settlement multiple times, Vivian. Your own brother included. If you recall the blizzard 2 winters past, his information has always proven reliable." Before Mrs. Harper could respond, Dr. Wallace, a balding man with spectacles and a no-nonsense demeanor, stood from his place among the council members. "Let's not waste time on old prejudices. What precautions do you recommend, James?" For the next half hour, James outlined practical security measures, increased vigilance for outlying farms, temporary patrols of the settlement perimeter, sending word to Fort Thompson of Red Hawk's movements. Nathan occasionally added details about traditional hunting patterns and likely routes the band might follow, his knowledge of both Dakota ways and settler concerns, creating a bridge between disparate worldviews. As the security discussion concluded, Reverend Parker shifted attention to the second agenda item. "Now, regarding our need for a teacher, Miss Summers has applied for the position, bringing considerable experience from her work in Philadelphia." Abigail rose at the Reverend's gesture, facing the assembled community with quiet dignity, despite the discomfort of being the focus of so many evaluating stares. She spoke clearly about her educational background, her 6 years teaching at the Fairfield School, her approach to managing multiple age groups with limited resources. "With 32 students of varying ages and attendance patterns," she concluded, "I would implement a monitorial system where older students assist in teaching younger ones, benefiting both groups while ensuring continuous progress despite irregular attendance." Her professional presentation earned thoughtful nods from many parents, though Mrs. Harper and her immediate circle maintained skeptical expressions. When Abigail finished and resumed her seat, Reverend Parker opened the floor for questions. "What experience do you have with the particular challenges of frontier children?" asked Mr. Nordstrom, a stocky farmer with a thick Swedish accent. "Our youngsters need practical knowledge alongside book learning. I taught at a charity school before." "Fairfield," Abigail replied. "Many students came from practical backgrounds with limited previous education. I developed approaches linking academic concepts to everyday applications, mathematics through carpentry and cooking measurements, geography through agricultural planning, science through weather prediction, and animal husbandry." This answer visibly impressed several farming families, but Mrs. Harper was not deterred. "While Miss Summers's qualifications sound adequate on paper," she said, rising to address the gathering, "we must consider the complete impact a teacher has on impressionable children. A teacher serves as model of refinement and propriety. The unfortunate disfigurement Miss Summers bears raises concerns about frightening younger children and presenting an appropriate example of womanly accomplishment." The blunt reference to Abigail's scars sent a ripple of uncomfortable movement through the gathering. Some looked away in embarrassment at such direct mention of her appearance, while others glanced toward Abigail with a mixture of curiosity and pity. Before Reverend Parker could intervene, Dr. Wallace stood abruptly. "As the settlement's physician, I feel compelled to address this medical ignorance. Miss Summers's countenance bears the marks of smallpox, survived in childhood. A disease that claims many lives, but left her not only alive, but clearly intellectually unimpaired. These marks are neither contagious nor reflective of any moral failing or current illness. They speak only to her survival of a significant challenge, perhaps demonstrating fortitude our children would do well to witness." His straightforward medical explanation shifted the atmosphere slightly, bringing nods of agreement from several listeners. Mr. Nordstrom added his practical perspective. "My Ingrid cares more whether teacher can make our Eric understand his figures than how teacher looks. Pretty face won't help boy manage farm accounts someday." The debate continued, with opinions divided primarily along predictable lines. Mrs. Harper and her social circle opposing, families more concerned with educational substance supporting. Thomas, when called upon as council member, offered a carefully neutral assessment of Abigail's evident qualifications, while avoiding mention of their personal situation. As voices grew more heated and positions more entrenched, an unexpected intervention silenced the room. Nathan Wolfe, who had remained a silent observer at the back, stepped forward into the lamplight. "I would speak," he said, his deep voice carrying authority that immediately commanded attention, the unexpected participation of someone usually content to remain on the periphery created an instant hush. "In Dakota way, marks on body tell story of person's journey," he began, his accented English deliberate but clear. "Warrior carries scars from battles. Signs of courage, not shame. Medicine woman bears marks of spirit encounters, signs of wisdom earned. We look at such marks with respect, not fear." His pale eyes swept the gathering before settling on Abigail with unexpected intensity. "I watch this woman since arrival. She speaks with knowledge. She treats child with respect. She faces unkindness with dignity." His gaze shifted to Emma, who sat with the Nordstrom children near the front. "The children, they see truth better than adults sometimes. They see person, not just marks." He gestured toward the settlement beyond the church walls. "Frontier needs strong people, people who survive, people who understand pain but keep moving forward. Your children need teacher who shows them how to face difficulty with courage, how to find worth in what others throw away." The simple eloquence of his assessment, delivered from a man of few words, landed with powerful impact. Even Mrs. Harper seemed momentarily at a loss for rebuttal, while parents exchanged thoughtful glances at this perspective that reframed Abigail's scars as potential asset rather than liability. In the silence that followed, Reverend Parker called for the council's vote. One by one, the 5 members cast their decisions. The Reverend himself and Dr. Wallace strongly in favor, Mr. Nordstrom pragmatically supportive, Thomas cautiously affirmative, and Mrs. Harper alone in opposition. By council decision, Miss Summers is appointed settlement teacher, duties to commence Monday next, Reverend Parker announced. Arrangements for her accommodations will be determined tomorrow. As the meeting dispersed into small clusters of conversation, Abigail remained seated, processing the unexpected turn of events. She had secured the position despite significant opposition, but more surprising was the source of the most powerful Advocacy on her behalf, not the reverend or doctor whose support she had anticipated, but the half-Dakota scout whose perception had cut through social pretenses to recognize qualities others overlooked. Nathan Wolfe was already slipping out the church door, avoiding the social interactions that followed community gatherings. Before he disappeared, he glanced back once, meeting Abigail's gaze across the crowded room. Something passed between them in that brief exchange, not quite understanding, but recognition between two people accustomed to being judged for their outward differences rather than their inner substance. As Abigail gathered her shawl to leave, she realized her path forward had suddenly shifted again. No longer Thomas Calloway's rejected bride, nor a stranded Easterner without purpose. She had found unexpected footing as Blackwood Settlement's teacher, and perhaps more significantly, had discovered an unlikely ally who saw value where others saw only scars. The schoolhouse transformed under Abigail's methodical care during the days before classes officially began. She arranged desks in groups according to advancement level rather than straight rows, created a reading corner with cushions salvaged from discarded furniture, and fashioned visual aids from materials most would have overlooked. Maps drawn on flour sacking stretched over wooden frames, alphabet cards made from repurposed tin lids painted with whitewash, and natural specimens collected on early morning walks displayed on shelves previously used for storing broken slates. Sarah Nordstrom, the farmer's wife whose practical support had proven invaluable, stood in the doorway surveying these changes with approval. "You've made something from nothing," she observed in her direct way, setting down a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Brought you some bread and preserves for your pantry. First day's teaching leave little time for cooking." "Thank you," Abigail replied, genuinely touched by the gesture. The Nordstroms had offered her the use of their former hired hand's cabin, a one-room structure behind their farmhouse, a mile from the settlement center. Basic but private, it provided independence without complete isolation, a balance that suited Abigail perfectly. Sarah nodded toward the handmade teaching materials. Resourceful, good quality for frontier life. Her simple approval carried more weight than elaborate compliments might have from others. "Children coming tomorrow? 29 have registered so far," Abigail confirmed. "The Jensen twins are still visiting relatives in Sioux Falls, and the Wallace boy is recovering from his broken arm. Nordstrom children already preparing. Eric polished his slate 3 times last night." Sarah's usual stoic expression softened with maternal pride. "He struggles with letters, but has good mind for figures." After Sarah departed, Abigail completed her preparations with focused energy. The position offered modest compensation, room, board, and a small stipend funded through a combination of territorial education allocation and parental contributions. More valuable was the opportunity to establish herself independently in the community, creating an identity separate from her aborted engagement to Thomas. Their interactions since the council meeting had been carefully polite, with Thomas offering practical assistance in her relocation to the Nordstrom property while maintaining emotional distance. Emma, however, had been inconsolable upon learning that Abigail would no longer reside in their home, extracting promises of regular visits that Abigail intended to honor. As twilight approached, Abigail locked the schoolhouse and began the walk to her new lodgings. The late April evening had turned unexpectedly chilly, with clouds gathering on the northern horizon suggesting possible rain. She pulled her shawl tighter, quickening her pace along the rutted track leading from the settlement toward the scattered, outlying farms. A movement in the tall grass beside the path caught her attention, not the usual rustling of wind or small animals, but something more deliberate. She paused, heart accelerating as she recalled James Blackwood's warning about renegade bands in the region. "No need for fear," came a deep voice as Nathan Wolfe rose from a crouched position several yards from the path. "Was checking tracks, not following you." Abigail pressed a hand to her chest, willing her pulse to slow. "You startled me, Mr. Wolfe." "Nathan," he corrected, approaching the path but maintaining a respectful distance. "Only government men are—" "Mr. Wolfe!" His expression remained serious beneath the broad brim of his hat, but something in his tone suggested the correction contained a private amusement. "What tracks are you checking?" Abigail asked, curiosity overcoming her initial alarm. Nathan gestured toward the disturbed grass. "3 riders passed here before dawn. Not settlement horses, unshod ponies moving east to west." He studied, her face seeming to evaluate whether further details would frighten or inform. "Scouts, probably, watching settlement patterns. From Red Hawk's band?" He nodded, his pale eyes reflecting the fading daylight. They observed before deciding approach. Normal practice. Abigail processed this information, appreciating his straightforward explanation rather than false reassurance. "Should I be concerned walking this path alone?" "Not yet," Nathan replied after brief consideration. "No hostile signs, just watching. But better not to walk after dark for now." He glanced at the darkening sky, then back to Abigail. "Storm coming. I walk with you to Nordstrom Farm." The offer, delivered more as statement than question, nevertheless remained free of presumption. Abigail sensed he would accept refusal without offense. "Thank you," she said simply. "I would appreciate the company." They walked side by side, though. Nathan positioned himself between Abigail and the open prairie stretching to their right, a subtle, protective gesture she found unexpectedly touching. Despite his taciturn reputation, he proved an observant companion, pointing out signs of wildlife and seasonal changes most settlement dwellers overlooked. "Prairie turning now," he noted, indicating patches of green emerging through last year's golden grass. 2 weeks more, wildflowers come. Good medicine plants then." "You know healing plants?" Abigail asked, a nod. "Mother was medicine woman. Taught me plants, what they heal, how to gather with respect. My mother taught me some herbal remedies as well," Abigail offered, "though eastern plants differ from those found here." This shared interest, however modest, created a bridge between their vastly different backgrounds. As they walked, Nathan asked thoughtful questions about Eastern healing traditions, while Abigail expressed genuine interest in Dakota medicine practices. Their conversation flowed with surprising ease, unburdened by the self-conscious posturing that characterized so many social interactions. "You prepare for teaching," Nathan observed as they approached the Nordstrom property. "Children lucky. You see them as people, not just empty vessels." The insight, recognizing her fundamental approach to education without her having articulated it, surprised Abigail. "How did you know that?" Something like a smile flickered across his normally serious features. "Watch how you talk with Emma Calloway. You listen first, then speak. Rare quality in white teachers." Before Abigail could respond, Nathan stiffened, his head turning sharply toward the darkening prairie. "Riders coming. 4, maybe 5. His voice lowered, tension evident in his suddenly alert posture. "Get to cabin quickly. Tell Nordstrom." Without waiting for acknowledgement, he moved with astonishing speed toward a stand of cottonwoods near the property's edge, seeming to disappear into the gathering shadows. Abigail hurried toward the farmhouse's welcoming lamplight, her mind racing with possibilities. Settlement patrols, returning neighbors, or something more concerning. Mr. Nordstrom met her at the yard gate, rifle in hand, his expression grave. In the fading light, "Saw you walking with Wolfe," he said without preamble. "He spotted riders." "Yes, approaching from the west," Abigail confirmed. "He said 4 or 5. Nordstrom nodded, unsurprised by Nathan's abrupt departure. "He'll circle around, identify them without being seen, best tracker in the territory." He gestured toward the cabin. "Go inside, Miss Summers. Sarah has supper waiting. I'll stand watch until we know more." The evening passed in tense anticipation, with Sarah maintaining calm efficiency while her husband alternated between watching from the porch and checking on their 3 sleeping children. Shortly before 9 o'clock, hoofbeats approached the farmyard, followed by a familiar voice calling greeting, "Nordstrom, it's Blackwood." Abigail joined the Nordstroms on the porch as James dismounted, accompanied by Thomas Calloway and 2 other settlement men she recognized from the council meeting. All carried rifles and wore expressions of controlled concern. "Perimeter patrol," James explained. "Checking outlying properties in rotation. Nathan found signs of observers near Jensen's North Field this afternoon." "He was here less than an hour ago," Nordstrom replied. "Spotted riders approaching from the west while walking Miss Summers back from the schoolhouse." James frowned. "We've been riding the western approach since sunset. Saw nothing." "If Wolf says riders there, then riders there," Nordstrom stated with absolute conviction. "His eyes see what others miss." Thomas stepped forward, his gaze finding Abigail with evident concern. "Are you settled comfortably, Miss Summers? Perhaps remaining in town would be safer until this situation resolves." "I'm quite secure here," Abigail replied, touched by his genuine concern, despite the awkwardness between them. "The Nordstroms have been exceedingly kind." "School still opens tomorrow?" James asked, changing the subject with tactful awareness of the former couple's discomfort. "Yes, absolutely," Abigail confirmed. "Children's education shouldn't be disrupted by precautionary measures." James nodded approvingly. "Good. Maintaining normal patterns while increasing vigilance is the right approach. We'll continue patrols through the night, with particular attention to the western approach." As the riders prepared to depart, a shadow detached itself from the darkness beyond the yard. Nathan materialized beside James's horse, having approached so silently that even the animals hadn't detected his presence. 5 riders, he reported without preamble. 2 Dakota, 3 white men, mixed group. James's expression sharpened with interest. "Renegades working together?" "No," Nathan replied, certainty in his tone. 2 Dakota from Standing Rock Reservation. Agency badges, others white traders by equipment, following same trail as Red Hawk scouts, but separate group. "Agency Indians working with the government?" Thomas asked, confusion evident. "Why would they be tracking Red Hawk's band?" "Not tracking Red Hawk," Nathan corrected. "Looking for someone else, woman and child according to their talk around campfire." "What woman?" James pressed. "A white captive?" Nathan shook his head. "Dakota woman, mixed blood child, fled reservation 2 months ago when soldiers tried to take boy to Eastern school, agency offering reward for return. The implications hung in the night air. A native mother, desperate to keep her son from forced assimilation, agency representatives determined to capture them, and profit-motivated traders joining the pursuit. A human drama unfolding alongside the larger tensions between remaining free bands and government forces. "Did they spot you?" James asked. "No," Nathan replied with absolute confidence. "They camp now by Creek Crossing, 3 miles west. Will move at dawn. Does this change our assessment of Red Hawk's movements?" Thomas inquired, clearly trying to determine how this new group affected settlement security. Nathan considered briefly. "Separate matters, but more outsiders moving through territory creates complications, more eyes watching, more potential for misunderstanding." After the patrol departed with promises to maintain heightened vigilance, Abigail found herself unable to sleep despite physical exhaustion. The events of the day swirled in her mind. School preparations, Nathan's unexpected companionship, the revelation of multiple groups moving through the area with separate agendas. Dakota territory suddenly seemed filled with invisible currents of human activity, most settlement residents oblivious to the complex dynamics unfolding around them. Morning arrived with pale sunlight and buzzing excitement as children gathered at the schoolhouse for their first day with the new teacher. Parents accompanied younger students, creating an impromptu community gathering in the schoolyard. Abigail welcomed each child individually, learning names and family connections while gently establishing expectations. Mrs. Harper's influence was evident in the hesitant approaches of several mothers who maintained careful distances while evaluating Abigail with poorly concealed skepticism. However, the children themselves showed little concern about her appearance. Their natural curiosity focused primarily on the transformed classroom visible through open windows. Emma arrived with Thomas, breaking away to run toward Abigail with unrestrained enthusiasm. "I brought my slate and 3 pencils, and the special reader Papa ordered from Sioux Falls," she announced, displaying each item proudly. "Excellent preparation," Abigail commended, smiling at Thomas over Emma's head. "Perhaps you could help the younger children find their seats while I speak with your father?" As Emma hurried inside with important purpose, Thomas approached, his manner more relaxed than during their recent interactions. "She's been awake since dawn preparing," he explained with paternal fondness. "I've never seen her so eager for learning." "Children often respond to being treated as capable individuals," Abigail observed. "Emma has a naturally inquisitive mind, like her mother," Thomas said softly, momentary sadness crossing his features before he composed himself. "The patrol found nothing concerning overnight. James believes regular school activities should continue, though children should remain within the settlement boundaries for now." Shortly after Thomas departed, Abigail rang the small brass bell to commence Blackwood Settlement's first proper school session in months. 31 students ranging from 6 to 15 years filled the desks, their expressions varying from excitement to trepidation to bored resignation among the older boys. "Welcome," Abigail began, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet room. "My name is Miss Summers, and I have 2 important beliefs about education that will shape our time together." She moved from behind her desk, standing where all could see her clearly, a deliberate choice to address any curiosity about her appearance directly rather than attempting concealment. "First, I believe every person in this room has valuable knowledge already, regardless of age. Second, I believe learning happens best when we connect new ideas to practical aspects of our lives." She gestured to the classroom arrangement. "You'll notice desks are grouped rather than in rows. You'll be working not only with me, but with each other. Older students helping younger ones, those with strengths in one area assisting those who find it challenging." From this foundation, Abigail launched into an assessment activity designed to determine each student's current knowledge while engaging their interest. Rather than traditional recitation, she presented practical problems, requiring various skills: calculating lumber needed for a barn wall, arithmetic, writing instructions for finding a specific location in the settlement, language, identifying how seasonal changes affected local wildlife, natural science. By mid-morning, the initial awkwardness had largely dissolved as students engaged with increasing enthusiasm. Even the reluctant older boys found themselves drawn into discussions about practical applications of geometry in construction and land measurement. Emma moved between activities with a serious expression of concentration that occasionally bloomed into delighted smiles when connections formed between previously separate concepts. During the noon recess, as children ate lunches brought from home in the schoolyard, Abigail noticed Nathan Wolfe's distinctive figure observing from the edge of the settlement. Though too distant for his expression to be discerned, his posture suggested watchful assessment rather than casual observation. After several minutes, he turned away, disappearing into the tall grass with the same uncanny ability to move without disturbing his surroundings. The afternoon session focused on establishing routines for ongoing education, reading circles, mathematics groups, natural history observation journals. Abigail assigned differentiated work appropriate to each level, designed to build skills while accommodating the irregular attendance patterns typical of frontier communities. As the school day concluded and children dispersed to their homes, Emma lingered, helping Abigail organize materials with exaggerated carefulness. "Papa says I can walk to the Nordstroms with you sometimes after school if Mr. Nordstrom sends Eric to accompany us home," she announced, clearly proud of this arranged privilege. "That would be lovely," Abigail replied, understanding the child's need for continued connection. "Perhaps we could read together on those afternoons." Emma's expression brightened further. "I told Charlotte Watson that you're the best teacher ever, and she shouldn't listen to her mother's foolishness." "Was that diplomatic?" Abigail suppressed a smile. "Perhaps not entirely. Remember, diplomacy involves considering how our words affect others, even when we believe we're right." "But Charlotte agreed with me," Emma persisted. "She said her mother says many foolish things, especially about Mr. Wolfe, who saved her uncles. Life during the blizzard. The guileless report of settlement dynamics revealed more than adults typically shared. People often fear what they don't understand," Abigail explained, gathering her teaching materials. "Mr. Wolfe's different background makes some people uncomfortable because it doesn't fit their familiar categories." "Like your face makes Mrs. Harper uncomfortable?" Emma asked with a child's devastating directness. "Something like that," Abigail acknowledged, appreciating Emma's perceptiveness while gently redirecting. "Let's finish organizing these readers before your father arrives." They walked home together, Emma chattering about her impressions of the day's lessons, while Abigail listened attentively. Thomas met them at the crossroads where their paths would diverge, Emma continuing to town with her father, while Abigail proceeded to the Nordstrom farm. "She hasn't stopped talking about school since I collected her," Thomas observed with bemused wonder. "I don't recall her ever being this enthusiastic about learning with previous teachers." "Children respond to being truly seen," Abigail replied simply. "Emma has a remarkable mind when given space to explore ideas her own way." Thomas studied her with thoughtful consideration. "You have a gift with children. I see that now more clearly." The acknowledgement, offered without qualification or reference to their personal history, felt like a small but significant bridge forming across the awkwardness between them. Not reconciliation or renewed romantic interest, but professional respect that might eventually lead to comfortable acquaintance. As Abigail continued alone toward the Nordstrom farm, her thoughts turned to the successful first day and modifications needed for tomorrow's lessons. So absorbed was she in these reflections that she nearly missed the subtle signs of another's presence until a voice spoke from unexpectedly close range. "Children listened well to you," Abigail started, turning to find Nathan standing several paces away, his approach once again undetected despite the open terrain. "You were watching the school?" He nodded, falling into step beside her without invitation, but maintaining enough distance to respect propriety. "Wanted to see how settlement children respond to different teaching, impressive methods." The simple compliment, delivered without embellishment, carried particular weight coming from someone so economical with praise. "Thank you. I believe children learn best when engaged with practical applications." Like Dakota teaching, Nathan observed, children learn by doing, watching, trying, not just memorizing words without meaning. They walked in companionable silence for several moments before Nathan spoke again, his tone shifting to something more serious. "Found signs of the woman and boy being tracked. They passed near here 3 days ago. Moving north, staying off. Main trails." Abigail processed this information with growing concern. "Are they in danger?" Always danger for those who flee, Nathan replied, his expression darkening. White schools take Dakota children, cut hair, forbid language, punish native. Raise. Boy is 7 winters old enough for Eastern school by government thinking. Mother refuses. The quiet passion underlying his measured words revealed personal investment in this situation beyond professional tracking assessment. You understand her choice, Abigail observed. Nathan's pale eyes met hers directly. Was taken to mission school as child. Experienced both worlds, not by choice. Some learning valuable, but cost was high. He gestured toward the horizon. Woman tries to save son from that pain. I respect her courage. The agency trackers? Will they find them? Possible, he acknowledged, but I find them first. The simple statement contained layers of intent that raised immediate questions. To help them escape. Nathan considered his answer carefully. To ensure choice. Government men speak of education, civilization, but take no interest in what Dakota mother wants for child. Someone should stand for her right to decide. The moral complexity of the situation struck Abigail forcefully. From the settlement's perspective, Nathan would be interfering with legitimate government representatives pursuing lawful objectives. Yet the human reality, a mother desperately trying to protect her child from cultural erasure, transcended such legalistic framing. Be careful, she said finally. The settlement already views you with suspicion. If you're caught helping fugitives. Always careful, Nathan replied with quiet confidence. But right action more important than what settlement thinks of me. They had reached the edge of the Nordstrom property, where prudence dictated they should part ways to avoid fueling settlement gossip. Nathan paused, studying Abigail with that same penetrating gaze that seemed to evaluate beyond surface appearances. You understand standing apart, he observed. Being seen as different. Maybe that's why you see children clearly. You know how it feels when others look but don't truly see. The insight, connecting her experience of being judged for her scarred appearance with her educational approach, demonstrated perception few had ever shown regarding her teaching philosophy. Before Abigail could respond, Nathan continued with unexpected directness. Marks on your face, they show survival. In Dakota way, such signs would be respected, not hidden. Show strength greater than sickness. He gestured toward the schoolhouse. In the distance, children understand this naturally. Adults forget how to see with clear eyes. With that observation, he touched his hat brim in farewell and moved away, soon blending with the prairie landscape through some mysterious combination of practiced movement and natural attunement. Abigail watched until he disappeared completely, his words settling deep in her consciousness. In just over a week, her understanding of herself had undergone remarkable transformation. From rejected bride defined by her appearance to respected. Teacher valued for her abilities, from Eastern outsider to community member with meaningful purpose. Most surprisingly, the catalyst for this shifting perspective had come from the most unexpected source. A man who himself existed between worlds, who recognized worth beyond conventional assessment because he too had experienced being measured by superficial standards and found wanting. As she turned toward her cabin, Abigail felt a growing certainty that the Dakota woman and her son were not the only ones whose paths were about to intersect with larger forces beyond their control. Nathan's determination to intervene, the unsettled conditions north of the settlement, and Red Hawk's band moving through the region, these separate elements seemed destined to converge, potentially drawing the entire community into their influence. For now, however, she would focus on tomorrow's lessons, on building connections with her students, on creating the educational foundation this frontier community needed. Whatever challenges approached on the horizon, she would face them with the same quiet dignity that had carried her through previous hardships. not despite her scars, but with the strength they represented. 3 weeks into Abigail's tenure as teacher, Blackwood Settlement experienced an unusually warm May afternoon that prompted her to move the day's natural science lesson outdoors. 30 students followed her to the meadow behind the schoolhouse, carrying slates and journals to record their observations of spring flora emerging in vibrant profusion across the prairie landscape. Remember to sketch the plants exactly as you see them, Abigail instructed, watching as children dispersed in small groups. Count petals, note leaf patterns, observe which insects visit which flowers. Your observations today will help us track seasonal changes throughout the year. Emma and 2 other girls headed toward a patch of purple coneflowers, while the older boys gravitated to a nearby stream to investigate aquatic plants. Abigail supervised with watchful attention, maintaining awareness of each group's location, while allowing them the freedom to explore independently. The practical lesson exemplified her teaching philosophy, which had rapidly transformed the settlement's educational approach. Rather than rote memorization delivered from the front of the classroom, Abigail created interactive experiences that connected academic concepts to the realities of frontier life. Parents initially skeptical of her methods had been won over by their children's enthusiastic engagement and demonstrable progress in basic skills. Even Mrs. Harper had grudgingly acknowledged improvement in her nephew's arithmetic abilities, though she attributed this to the boy's natural intelligence rather than Abigail's teaching. The gradual acceptance felt like victory, not for personal vindication, but for establishing educational principles that would serve these children long after they left her classroom. As Abigail circulated among the groups, providing guidance and answering questions, she became aware of a rider approaching from the north. The distinctive silhouette of James Blackwood became clear as he drew nearer, his horse moving at a purposeful trot rather than urgent gallop. Not emergency news then, but something warranting immediate attention. "Class," Abigail called, raising her voice just enough to carry across the meadow. "Please continue your observations. I need to speak with Mr. Blackwood briefly." James dismounted at the meadow's edge, removing his hat as Abigail approached. His expression held the measured concern of a man accustomed to evaluating potential threats without causing undue alarm. "Miss Summers," he greeted with a respectful nod. "Apologies for interrupting your lesson." "No apology necessary," she replied. "Is something wrong?" James glanced toward the scattered students before responding. "Nothing immediate, but developments worth discussing. Nathan returned this morning from tracking the woman and child we discussed. He's found them, but circumstances have complicated. Are they safe?" Abigail asked, remembering Nathan's determination to intercede. "For now," James confirmed. "Nathan established contact 3 days ago. The woman is named Winona, her son, Chayton. They've been surviving remarkably well, but the boy has developed a persistent cough that concerns Nathan. They need medical attention, but fear entering the settlement with agency trackers still searching the region." Abigail processed this information quickly. "Has Dr. Wallace been informed?" "That's part of what I came to discuss," James replied, lowering his voice further. "Nathan has brought them to a sheltered location about 4 miles northwest of here. He's requested Dr. Wallace's assistance, but more importantly, he specifically asked for your presence." "Mine?" Abigail couldn't hide her surprise. "Why would he ask for me?" "The boy is frightened, refuses to let strangers approach. Nathan believes your experience with children might help." James hesitated before adding, "And apparently Winona has heard about the new teacher with marked face, who treats all children with respect. Word travels even among those avoiding settlements." The realization that her reputation had somehow reached beyond Blackwood's boundaries sent an unexpected warmth through Abigail. That this Dakota woman, herself an outsider fleeing authorities, would trust someone she knew only through second-hand accounts spoke to both desperate circumstances and the power of shared experience transcending cultural differences. "Of course I'll help," she said without hesitation, "but I have 28 children under my supervision until 3 o'clock. James nodded, having anticipated this constraint. "Thomas has agreed to collect the children early today. I've already informed several parents there's a situation requiring the school's early closure." He gestured toward the settlement, where Thomas's tall figure could be seen approaching along the main road. "Will we return before dark?" Abigail asked, mentally calculating practical details as she always did. "Yes, though we'll need to leave." Promptly, Nathan was clear that agency trackers are within a day's ride of finding their location. Medical assistants can't wait for nightfall. Thomas arrived as they were speaking, his expression showing the same measured concern as James's. Since the night patrol 3 weeks earlier, he and Abigail had established a cordial relationship based on mutual respect for each other's roles in the community. They greeted each other with simple nods before Thomas addressed the immediate situation. "I'll ensure all children return safely to their homes," he assured Abigail. "Mrs. Nordstrom has been informed you're assisting with a medical matter and may return late to the farm." "Thank you," Abigail replied, appreciating his straightforward handling of logistics without unnecessarily complicating their interaction. The children were documenting spring flora. Perhaps you could have them complete their journal entries before dismissal. While Thomas gathered the students and explained the change in plans, Abigail quickly collected essential items from the schoolhouse, her medical kit containing basic remedies inherited from her mother, several books that might interest a 7-year-old boy, and a slate with colored chalk she kept for younger children. James had brought a second horse, a gentle mare accustomed to inexperienced riders. As they set out across the open prairie, traveling cross-country rather than following established trails, Abigail realized this was her first venture beyond the immediate settlement boundaries since her arrival. The vastness of the Dakota landscape opened before them, rolling grasslands interrupted by occasional stands of cottonwoods marking hidden watercourses, distant hills shimmering in the afternoon heat. "Nathan said you've been observing Red Hawk's band as well," Abigail noted as they rode side by side. "Has there been any direct contact?" James shook his head. "They're maintaining distance, keeping to less settled areas approximately 15 miles northwest. Nathan believes they're deliberately avoiding confrontation while establishing seasonal hunting grounds." "The agency trackers pose more immediate concern then?" "Yes," James confirmed grimly. 3 white traders working with 2 reservation scouts, all motivated by the $100 reward for returning Winona and Chayton to Standing Rock. They've been questioning isolated homesteaders about sightings, sometimes misrepresenting themselves as official territorial authorities. This clarified the urgency of their mission beyond simple medical assistance. If the agency men located Winona and Chayton before they received help and relocated to safer territory, mother and son would be forcibly separated. The woman returned to reservation restrictions, while her son was sent to an Eastern assimilation school thousands of miles away. After riding for nearly an hour, James led them into a deeply cut ravine where a small stream had carved a natural shelter beneath overhanging banks. The narrow watercourse was lined with cottonwoods and willows that provided concealment from distant observation. They dismounted, leading their horses along the stream bed until James gave a distinctive low whistle. Nathan appeared almost immediately from behind a rocky outcropping, his movement so well blended with the natural environment that Abigail might have missed him entirely without James's signal. Dr. Wallace followed more visibly, medical bag in hand, his city-bred movements conspicuous against the wilderness backdrop. "They're just ahead," Nathan informed them, his usually impassive expression showing signs of genuine concern. Boy's cough worsened overnight, breathing labored now. Sounds like bronchial infection, possibly developing into pneumonia, Dr. Wallace stated professionally. I've brought appropriate medications, but haven't been able to properly examine him. The child becomes agitated when I approach. Nathan nodded confirmation. Remembers white doctor at reservation who took blood samples from children. Associates. Medical examination with pain. That's where you come in, Miss Summers, James explained. Nathan believes your experience with children might help establish trust. They proceeded around the bend in the ravine to a small clearing where a crude shelter had been fashioned from bent willow branches covered with canvas. Outside this makeshift dwelling, a Dakota woman of perhaps 30 years stood watching there. Approach, her posture simultaneously protective and exhausted. She wore a combination of traditional dress and practical frontier clothing. Deerskin leggings beneath a calico skirt, moccasins, and a man's work shirt altered to fit her slender frame. Her long black hair was braided simply, and her dark eyes held wary intelligence as she evaluated the newcomers. Nathan spoke to her quietly in Dakota language, gesturing toward Abigail with what appeared to be reassurance. The woman, Winona, studied Abigail's face with careful attention, her gaze lingering on the smallpox scars before moving to meet Abigail's eyes directly. He says you help children, Winona said in accented but clear English. That you understand. How it feels when others see only marks, not person beneath. I try to see people for who they are, not how they appear, Abigail confirmed gently. May I meet your son? Winona hesitated only briefly before nodding and lifting the canvas flap of the shelter. Inside, a small boy lay on a bedroll of blankets, his breathing audibly labored even from the entrance. His face showed fever's flush against unnaturally pale skin, and his thin body curled protectively around each painful breath. Abigail knelt at a non-threatening distance, making no immediate attempt to touch him. "Hello, Chayton," she said softly. "My name is Miss Summers. I'm a teacher from the settlement, and I've brought some things that might make you feel better." The boy's dark eyes, bright with fever, regarded her warily. A coughing spasm shook his small frame, clearly causing significant pain. When it subsided, he spoke in a whisper. "Teacher has marks like stars on her face." Abigail smiled gently at this description, so different from the shameful terminology usually applied to her scars. "Yes, I've had these marks since I was about your age. I was very sick, but I got better." "Does it hurt?" Chayton asked, echoing the question Emma had posed weeks earlier. "Not anymore," Abigail assured him, "and I brought something that might help your breathing hurt less too." She opened her bag, removing a small jar of aromatic salve, her mother's recipe containing camphor, eucalyptus oil, and beeswax. "This helps open tight chests, so breathing comes easier. Would you like to smell it first?" She uncapped the jar, allowing the medicinal scent to reach him without moving closer. Chayton's expression showed cautious interest as he inhaled the distinctive aroma. "Smells like pine trees and mint leaves together." "That's exactly right," Abigail confirmed, impressed by his descriptive accuracy. "The medicine man brought by your mother's friend needs to listen to your lungs to understand what's making you sick. But first, maybe we could put some of this salve on your chest to help you breathe easier. Would that be all right?" The negotiated approach, acknowledging his concerns while offering immediate comfort, gradually earned Chayton's trust. Abigail demonstrated applying the salve to her own wrist first, then guided Winona in applying it to her son's chest and back. The aromatic compounds began working quickly, easing his labored breathing enough that he eventually allowed Dr. Wallace to approach for a proper examination. "Bronchial infection, as I suspected," the doctor confirmed after listening to Chayton's lungs. "Not yet progressed to pneumonia, thankfully, but requiring immediate treatment." He prepared medications from his bag, a syrup for the cough and antimicrobial powder to be mixed with water. These need to be administered every 4 hours, including through the night. The fever should break within 48 hours, if treated. consistently. While Dr. Wallace explained dosage instructions to Winona, Abigail engaged Chayton with the slate and colored chalk she had brought. Despite his illness, the boy showed remarkable artistic ability, creating detailed drawings of animals and natural features. His intelligence and creativity were immediately apparent, confirming Nathan's determination to prevent his forced removal to an assimilation school that would likely crush these native talents in favor of rigid conformity. He has gift for seeing patterns, Nathan observed, watching the boy draw. Would make excellent tracker, healer, or storyteller if allowed to develop naturally. Eastern schools would consider that irrelevant, Dr. Wallace stated, with unusual bitterness. They measure progress only by English vocabulary and Christian scripture memorized. As afternoon shadows lengthened, the immediate medical crisis stabilized, but the larger problem remained. Chayton's condition prevented immediate travel, yet remaining in one location increased the risk of discovery by agency trackers. They cannot stay here, James concluded after consulting with Nathan about tracking signs in the area. The search. A party crossed their trail yesterday near the creek junction. They'll work their way to this ravine within a day, even without Nathan's tracking skills. The boy can't travel in his condition, Dr. Wallace insisted. The exertion could trigger full pneumonia, potentially fatal at his age. Winona, who had been listening to this exchange with increasing concern, spoke directly to Abigail rather than the men. What happens if agency men find us? Abigail couldn't bring herself to offer false comfort. They would likely separate you, return you to the reservation while sending Chayton to the Eastern school. The Dakota woman's expression hardened with quiet determination. Better to risk travel than certain separation. There might be another option, Abigail suggested, an idea forming as she considered alternatives. What if Chayton could receive proper medical care while remaining hidden from the agency men? Where? Nathan asked, immediately grasping her intent. Settlement too obvious, every stranger noted. The Nordstrom farm has a root cellar beneath their barn, Abigail explained. It's accessible through an exterior entrance concealed by equipment, large enough for comfortable temporary shelter and unknown to casual observers. Mr. Nordstrom constructed it specifically with emergency shelter in mind, given the region's harsh winters and potential conflict. James considered this suggestion with thoughtful attention. The Nordstroms would need to agree. Harboring Winona and Chayton technically violates federal policy regarding reservation fugitives. Mr. Nordstrom values family bonds above government regulations, Abigail stated with quiet confidence, and Mrs. Nordstrom has nursing experience from the war years. She could ensure Chayton receives proper care. Is there no legal way to prevent the boy's removal to Eastern school? Dr. Wallace asked, directing his question to James as the settlement's most knowledgeable resident regarding territorial regulations. James shook his head grimly. Current policy gives Indian agents near absolute authority regarding education, placement. They claim it serves the civilization process, but in practice it destroys family bonds and cultural continuity. As the adults debated possibilities, Abigail noticed Chayton watching them with fevered intensity despite his illness, clearly understanding that his fate was being determined by this conversation among strangers. She moved closer to him, keeping her voice gentle. Would you like to hear a story while the others talk? I brought a special book from my school. The distraction proved effective, drawing the boy's attention away from the tense discussion. Abigail read from an illustrated natural history text, explaining creatures and landscapes beyond his experience while respecting his intelligent questions. Winona joined them, listening with equal interest while maintaining protective closeness. To her son, Eventually, a plan crystallized. Nathan would create false trails leading northwest to divert the agency trackers, while James and Dr. Wallace escorted Winona and Chayton to the Nordstrom farm after dark. Abigail would return to the settlement immediately to make necessary arrangements with the Nordstroms, her routine departure less likely to attract attention than the others' movements. As she prepared to leave with James, who would accompany her partway before doubling back, Winona approached Abigail with dignified purpose. "My son trusts you," she stated simply. "Rare gift with strangers, even rarer with white strangers." "Children often see beyond appearances when adults cannot," Abigail replied. Winona studied her face again, this time with something beyond assessment, a recognition of shared experience. Despite vastly different circumstances, your marks show survival, not weakness. In Dakota way, such signs carry medicine power, wisdom earned through suffering and emergence. The validation, so similar to Nathan's earlier observation, yet weighted differently coming from another woman, touched Abigail deeply. Before she could respond, Winona continued with quiet intensity. "If we separated from each other, Chayton would forget Dakota language, forget family stories, forget who he truly is. To white schools, this forgetting is success. To us, it is soul death." "I understand," Abigail assured her. "We'll do everything possible to keep you together." The return journey took Abigail and James cross-country again, maintaining vigilance for any sign of the agency tracking party. They parted at a creek crossing 2 miles from the settlement, James continuing northwest to create visible signs of Nathan supposedly traveling alone, while Abigail proceeded directly to the Nordstrom farm. Sarah Nordstrom received the explanation with characteristic practical assessment, asking pointed questions about medical needs and security considerations, rather than dwelling on legal implications. Her husband, when he returned from fieldwork, demonstrated similar pragmatic concern, focused on effective implementation rather than abstract morality. "Root cellar stays cool even in summer," he confirmed, leading Abigail to the concealed entrance. Beneath weathered equipment at the barn's northern side, has ventilation shaft disguised as fence post, could house family of 4 if needed. The space below proved surprisingly substantial. A rock-walled chamber approximately 12 feet square with packed earth floor, sturdy shelving currently, holding preserved foods and emergency supplies, and an air shaft cleverly disguised within hollow fence posts that provided both ventilation and emergency exit if needed. "How long could they stay here safely?" Abigail asked, evaluating the space with practical attention. "Week, maybe 2 without raising questions," Mr. Nordstrom replied. "Longer gets complicated. Supply needs, waste disposal, keeping children from mentioning visitors." This timeline aligned with Dr. Wallace's estimate for Chayton's recovery, approximately 10 days before the boy could travel without medical risk. Beyond that, Nathan would need to determine a safer destination, perhaps among sympathetic Dakota communities farther north or west. As darkness fell, Abigail helped Sarah prepare the root cellar for habitation, clean bedding, fresh water, medical supplies positioned for easy access, and food requiring no cooking. Mr. Nordstrom established surveillance patterns with his oldest son, ensuring approach routes remained observed without creating obvious watchposts that might draw attention. Shortly before midnight, Nathan arrived alone, materializing from the darkness with his characteristic silence. "They come soon," he informed them quietly. "James and Doctor bring them by creek path. Agency men camped 8 miles northwest, following false trail I left. Should by 2 days before they realize direction change." Within the hour, James appeared with Winona and Chayton, the latter wrapped in blankets and carried in the doctor's arms. The boy's condition had stabilized, but remained serious. His breathing eased by medication, but still labored enough to prevent walking, They transferred the small family to the root cellar quarters, Dr. Wallace providing final instructions for overnight care before departing to avoid raising suspicion with prolonged absence from the settlement. "I'll return tomorrow with more medication," he promised, his professional concern evidently outweighing legal considerations. "Sarah knows proper dosages if symptoms worsen before then." As the men prepared to leave, Abigail knelt beside Chayton's makeshift bed, where the boy had finally fallen into fever-eased sleep. "I'll bring books tomorrow," she promised Winona, "and perhaps some learning materials that might interest him during recovery." Winona clasped Abigail's hand briefly, the gesture conveying gratitude beyond words. "You risk much for strangers," she observed softly. "Not strangers," Abigail corrected, "a mother and child deserving the same consideration any family should receive." Outside, Nathan waited while the others departed, his watchful attention continuously scanning their surroundings, despite the seeming security of the farm's isolated position. When Abigail emerged from settling Winona and Chayton, he acknowledged her with a slight nod that contained unexpected respect. "You understand what others cannot see," he stated, the observation delivered as established fact rather than speculative assessment. "See beyond marks, beyond skin color, beyond difference. I've had practice being judged by appearances," Abigail replied simply. "It teaches perspective." Nathan studied her face in the moonlight, his pale eyes disconcertingly direct. "Dangerous. Time's coming. Agency men won't stop searching easily. Reward money motivates the traders beyond reason." "Do you think they'll discover the Nordstrom farm?" "Not immediately," Nathan replied after considering. "But settlements have watching eyes, loose tongues, hard to keep secrets when many know." This practical assessment acknowledged the reality that their improvised sanctuary couldn't remain secure indefinitely. Each person involved, the Nordstroms, Dr. Wallace, James, Nathan himself and Abigail, represented potential discovery through innocent misstep or observed pattern change. "How will we know if the trackers approach the settlement?" Abigail asked, focusing on immediate concerns rather than abstract possibilities. "I watch," Nathan stated with simple confidence. "James creates false signs to draw them north. Between us, we know their movements before they do." As he prepared to depart, presumably to maintain surveillance of the agency group, Nathan hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "You risk position in settlement by helping. Some would not. Understand choice to protect Dakota mother and child." The observation contained warning, acknowledgement of potential consequences, and implicit question about her willingness to accept such risk. Abigail considered her response carefully. "When I arrived here, I was judged based solely on my appearance. My worth determined by factors beyond my control," she said finally. "I cannot stand aside while the same happens to Chayton. His entire future determined by how he looks rather than who he is or what he might become." Nathan nodded, seemingly satisfied with this explanation. "Strong principles, rare quality." He gestured toward the concealed root cellar. "Boy has gift for seeing patterns, understanding connections. Valuable mind that should develop naturally, not be broken and reformed to white expectations." "We'll protect him as long as needed," Abigail assured him, the promise extending beyond mere temporary shelter to encompass the larger principle at stake. After Nathan disappeared into the darkness, Abigail returned to her cabin, mind racing, with contingency plans and potential complications. She had arrived in Blackwood Settlement seeking simple security after Thomas's rejection, focusing on establishing herself professionally while avoiding further personal disappointment. Now, barely a month later, she found herself centrally involved in a situation that challenged legal boundaries while affirming deeper moral principles. The smallpox scars that had shaped so much of her life experience had created unexpected connection. With both Nathan and Winona, three outsiders defined by visible difference, yet united by recognition of essential humanity beyond superficial judgment. That shared understanding now formed the foundation of their unlikely alliance to protect a child from institutional forces that would sacrifice his individual potential for conformity's sake. As she prepared for sleep, knowing tomorrow would bring both regular teaching duties and clandestine assistance to their hidden guests, Abigail reflected on how completely her perception of her scars had transformed since arriving in Dakota territory. What had once been source of shame and limitation had become pathway to deeper understanding, connection with others similarly judged, and courage to stand for principles beyond conventional acceptance. Whatever dangers approached on the horizon, agency trackers, settlement discovery, or potential conflict with Red Hawk's band, she would face them with new confidence, born not despite her marked appearance, but because of the wisdom her difference had taught her about seeing beyond surfaces to essential truths beneath. The agency trackers arrived in Blackwood Settlement exactly 1 week after Chayton and Winona had been hidden in the Nordstrom's root cellar. They rode down the main street in late afternoon, as Abigail was dismissing her students, three white traders with weathered faces and calculating eyes, accompanied by two Dakota men in government-issued clothing that marked them as reservation. In police, Abigail maintained outward composure as she watched them tie their horses outside Jensen's general store, though her heart accelerated with concern. For 7 days, they had successfully concealed their guests while treating Chayton's illness. The boy's condition had improved steadily under Dr. Wallace's care and Sarah Nordstrom's attentive nursing, his fever finally breaking 3 days earlier, but he remained weak, still unable to travel the distances necessary to reach safer territory. Remember, to complete your mathematics problems before tomorrow, Abigail reminded her students, deliberately keeping to normal routines despite the newcomers' arrival. And those collecting plant specimens should bring their pressed samples for our classification project. As children dispersed toward waiting parents, Thomas approached from the mill where he had been working, his expression revealing he had also noticed the strangers. "Agency men," he confirmed quietly, positioning himself beside Abigail with subtle protectiveness. "James sent word they were headed this way, thought they wouldn't arrive until tomorrow." "Have they spoken with anyone yet?" Abigail asked, methodically gathering her teaching materials while maintaining casual appearance. "Just arrived, but they'll be asking questions soon enough." Thomas hesitated before adding, "Nathan left word that you should proceed to the Nordstroms as usual. No changes in routine that might draw attention." Abigail nodded, understanding. Any deviation from established patterns would only heighten scrutiny. For the past week, she had maintained meticulous consistency in her movements, teaching during the day, returning to the Nordstrom farm in late afternoon, visiting with Winona and Chayton in the concealed root cellar under the guise of assisting Sarah with preserving early garden produce. "Will you tell Emma I'll visit on Sunday as planned?" she asked, the simple domestic question masking deeper coordination of their mutual understanding about the situation. "Of course. She's been working on a story to share with you." Thomas's gaze drifted toward the agency men who had emerged from the store and were speaking with Mr. Jensen. "Be careful, Abigail. Those traders look desperate for their reward money." The use of her first name, rare in their interactions since their broken engagement, underscored his genuine concern. Their relationship had gradually evolved toward friendship, built on mutual respect, the initial awkwardness giving way to comfortable association, defined by community roles rather than personal disappointment. Abigail followed her usual path from the settlement toward the Nordstrom farm, forcing herself to maintain normal pace despite the urgency throbbing beneath her calm exterior. As she crested the small rise that marked the halfway point, she spotted a familiar figure, waiting in the shadow of a cottonwood stand. Nathan, positioned where he could observe both the settlement behind her and the farm ahead. "They've arrived, earlier than expected," she said as she reached him, not bothering with greeting formalities. Nathan nodded, his expression grim. "Found my false trail faster than anticipated. Leader has tracking skills I underestimated." He gestured toward the settlement. "They ask questions already, claim authority beyond their actual standing." "Do they suspect the Nordstrom farm, specifically?" "Not yet," Nathan replied. "Asking about all outlying properties, any strangers seen. Recently, creating fear to loosen tongues." This matched Thomas's assessment of the traders' desperation for reward money. With each passing day, their quarry moved potentially farther from recovery, making their pursuit increasingly urgent and potentially reckless. "Chayton is improving but still too weak for extended travel," Abigail explained. "Dr. Wallace believes he needs at least 3 more days before attempting even short journeys." Nathan absorbed this information with characteristic calm assessment rather than visible frustration. 3 days, difficult but possible. I've prepared secondary location if Nordstrom farm compromised. More remote, less comfortable, but secure. They walked together toward the farm, maintaining conversation that would appear unremarkable to distant observation while coordinating contingency plans. Nathan had spent the week alternating between monitoring the agency trackers and establishing escape routes for Winona and Chayton when the boy became strong enough to travel. "Red Hawk's band has moved closer," he informed Abigail as they approached. "The Nordstrom property, 12 miles northwest now, makes agency men nervous, divides their attention between searching for Winona and watching for larger band movements. Is there risk of direct conflict?" "Always risk," Nathan acknowledged. "But Red Hawk, primarily concerned with hunting, not confrontation, only becomes dangerous if agency men create provocation." At the farm, Sarah Nordstrom was hanging laundry with deliberate domesticity, creating normal appearance while maintaining vigilant observation of approaching travelers. Her relief at seeing Nathan accompanying Abigail was momentarily visible before her practical demeanor reasserted itself. "Visitors en route cellar," she informed them quietly as they assisted with the laundry for possible watchers' benefit. Boy asked for teachers' promised books. While Sarah maintained visible presence in the yard, Abigail and Nathan slipped into the barn and accessed the concealed entrance to the root cellar. Below, they found Winona sorting dried herbs with methodical precision, while Chayton sat propped against pillows, his thin face brightening at their arrival. "Teacher brings new books?" he asked, his voice stronger than days previous, though still showing effects of his illness. "Even better," Abigail replied, kneeling beside him. "I've brought paper and colored pencils as promised." She produced these materials from her teaching satchel, along with several books selected specifically to engage his curious mind. While Chayton explored these treasures, Abigail and Nathan explained the situation to Winona in low, measured tones. The Dakota woman received the news with stoic calm, though her hand moved instinctively to her son's shoulder in protective gesture. "How soon must we leave?" she asked practically. 3 days ideal for boy's strength," Nathan replied. "But need to move sooner if trackers narrow search." Chayton looked up from his drawing, his dark eyes revealing comprehension beyond his years. "I can travel tomorrow if needed," he asserted with quiet dignity. "Don't want to bring trouble to kind farm people." This simple declaration, a child's willingness to endure physical hardship to protect those who had helped him, struck Abigail forcefully. At 7 years old, Chayton demonstrated consideration and courage that many adults failed to achieve in lifetime. "We'll only move early if absolutely necessary," she assured him, gently smoothing his dark hair. "For now, continue regaining your strength and working on those drawings. I'd like to see your progress when I return tomorrow." As darkness approached, Nathan departed to maintain surveillance of the agency trackers' movements within the settlement. Abigail remained at the farm as usual, assisting with evening chores while periodically checking on their hidden guests. The practiced routine continued smoothly, though underlying tension remained palpable in every interaction. Shortly after supper, as Abigail was reviewing student work by lamplight in her cabin, a soft knock interrupted her concentration. Opening the door cautiously, she found James Blackwood standing on her small porch, his expression containing both urgency and something more complex. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. "Information that shouldn't be shared outdoors." Once inside, James revealed what he had learned while observing the agency men's questioning at Jensen's store. They're offering $50 cash for specific information leading to Winona and Chayton's capture, doubled from the original reward. Several of the settlement's less prosperous residents seemed tempted. "Has anyone provided actual information?" Abigail asked, concern sharpening her tone. Nothing substantial yet, but Mrs. Harper mentioned seeing Nathan frequently traveling between settlement and this farm, suggested unusual interest in the new teacher. James's expression revealed discomfort with repeating this insinuation. "They're likely to expand their search to outlying properties tomorrow, with particular attention to farms, where Nathan has been observed." This development accelerated their timeline dangerously. If the agency men focused specifically on the Nordstrom farm, the hiding place might be discovered before Chayton was strong enough for safe travel. "There's something else you should know," James continued, hesitation evident in his typically confident manner. "Something about Nathan that explains his extraordinary commitment to protecting Winona and Chayton." Abigail waited as James gathered his thoughts, sensing the importance of what would follow. "Chayton is Nathan's nephew," he revealed finally. "Winona is his sister. He didn't tell you because he feared knowledge of the relationship might place you in more difficult position if questioned directly by authorities." The revelation crystallized previously puzzling elements: Nathan's exceptional determination beyond professional tracking interest, his immediate connection with the boy, the shared physical traits she had noticed but not fully registered. Understanding bloomed with sudden clarity, transforming her perception of everything that had occurred since the fugitive's arrival. "Why tell me now?" Abigail asked. "Because tomorrow may bring confrontation we can't avoid," James replied gravely. "You deserve to understand exactly what you're risking and for whom. This isn't abstract principle anymore. It's family fighting to remain family against forces that would separate them permanently." This new dimension deepened the moral complexity of their situation, while simultaneously simplifying Abigail's commitment. Nathan had risked everything to protect his sister and nephew, drawing upon his unique position between worlds to create sanctuary where none should have existed. That he had trusted her, a relative stranger, with their safety, spoke to something he had recognized in her from their first meaningful interaction. "We need to move them tonight," Abigail decided, rising with sudden determination. "Before the search narrows specifically to this farm. Is Nathan's secondary location prepared?" James nodded. "Small cave in the western ridgeline, unknown to settlement residents. He's stocked basic supplies already. Chayton isn't fully recovered, but he's strong enough for short travel if properly supported," Abigail assessed, mentally cataloguing necessary preparations. "I'll speak with the Nordstroms immediately." As she gathered essential items, additional medications, warm blankets, food requiring no preparation, Abigail found herself filled with unexpected clarity rather than fear. The path before her carried significant risk to her position in the community and potentially her legal standing. yet felt unquestionably right in ways that transcended conventional considerations. The woman who had arrived in Blackwood Settlement, desperately seeking acceptance, despite her scarred appearance, now stood ready to challenge authority on behalf of those facing judgment far more consequential than social rejection. Somewhere in the weeks between her arrival and this moment, external validation had ceased being her primary concern, replaced by commitment to principles worth defending regardless of others' approval. Outside, stars emerged in the clear Dakota sky as Abigail stepped from her cabin toward the main farmhouse. Whatever came with tomorrow's light, confrontation, discovery, or successful evasion, she moved forward with certainty, born of recognizing deeper truth. The very differences that had once defined her as outsider now enabled her to see beyond boundaries, others accepted without question, revealing the essential humanity connecting all who faced judgment, based on appearance rather than character. As Nathan had told her weeks earlier, sometimes marks carried wisdom earned through suffering and emergence. Tonight, that wisdom would guide them all toward whatever future awaited beyond the settlement's limited horizons. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.